Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, we are going to learn how to tackle situational questions in the PMP exam. I was getting a lot of requests from you guys to help you understand how to tackle situational questions in the PMP exam. Situational questions are one of the most difficult questions you can experience in the PMP exam, and about 50 to 60% of total questions in the PMP exam are situational questions. So in today's video, we are going to learn the exact framework which you must use to tackle situational questions in the PMP exam. Once you understand this framework very carefully, you can handle any situational question in the PMP exam. So do not skip any part of this video. Grab a pen and a paper and let's get started. So if you have been associated with this channel for a while, you know that the tips and strategies that I share in this channel are exactly the same ones which were used by me to pass my PMP exam in the first attempt. So if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I publish a new video. And like I said, make sure you watch this video till the end because we'll be solving a couple of situational questions in this video using this exact framework. So let's get started. So guys, to solve situational questions, you first need to identify the question as a situational question, okay? So for that, what you need to do is you need to check the question stem. Now, what is a question stem? So typically a situational question starts with a question body where it gives a situation that you are a project manager and you are driving a project and you are experiencing some kind of a situation. So that's the situation which is given as a question body. Now, when you move on to the question stem, it is the question it asks after providing you the situation. It can start with what should the project manager do next? What is the next logical step? What are you likely to do first? What should the project manager do? What is the best course of action here? Or what is the next best course of action? So these are the question stems. So whenever you see a question in the PMP exam, you see a situation, go ahead and see that what is the question asking. If you see that the question is asking, or in a synonymous way asking any of these 6 items, you can classify the question as a situational question. Okay. Now next what we'll do is we'll talk about the 2 frameworks which you need to keep in mind while answering situational question. The first framework is called the Ideal Project Manager Behavior Framework. Okay. So this framework essentially summarizes all the ideal behavior a project manager needs to have while driving a project, or maybe we can say a PMBOK style project manager needs to have while driving a project. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and understand the 12 key characteristics or the 12 key behaviors a good project manager needs to demonstrate while driving a project. First, a good project manager holds safety, quality, and governance non-negotiable during a project. So these are sacrosanct, these cannot be negotiated. Second, a good project manager holds the scope of a project sacrosanct while driving a project. So a good project manager always keeps an eye whether there is a scope creep or whether there is any type of scope changes which is happening in a project. A good project manager never bypasses steps, processes, or documentation to accelerate the delivery of a project or the closure of a project. Number 4, a good project manager is always proactive rather than reactive and always has a plan B. Number 5, a good project manager owns up issues and problems rather than delegations. Escalation is the last resort for him. So as a good project manager, you are not expected to escalate any issue to your sponsor until and unless you own it up and try to solve it by yourself. Okay. Point number 6, a good project manager holds every department accountable for their tasks. It's self-explanatory. Point 7, questions and analyzes every change request critically. So this typically links to the change management framework. So whenever a change comes to a project manager, a good project manager always questions and analyzes the request before going ahead and implementing it. Point number 8, a good project manager always puts his team before himself and demonstrates servant leadership. Point number 9, he invests sufficient time to identify and engage stakeholders. Point number 10, he communicates right time, right people, right information in the right way. So these are the 4 R's of the communication management. Point number 11, he knows how to prioritize to meet the best interests of the project as well as the company. So a project manager is not selfish and he is not expected to behave that only he is entitled to drive the project, because he may be in the role of a project manager, but on a broader terms, he is an employee of the company. So he needs to respect the best interests of the company as well while arriving at some decisions. And the last one, a good project manager knows and exercises authority and credibility in the right way to ensure the best interests of all. Okay, so that summarizes the 12 key behaviors a good project manager needs to demonstrate, and you need to keep all these 12 behaviors in mind while answering a situational question. We'll come to that and we'll see how this framework helps us to answer the situational questions. So moving on to the next framework. The next framework we call the positive bias principle, and what it says is, I will analyze every option word by word with a positive bias of acceptance until I get a solid reason to reject it. Now what it essentially means is, whenever we analyze every option, we will read the option word by word and will be in a positive bias to accept that option until and unless we get a solid reason to reject the option. So we will not reject any option until and unless we have a very solid evidence that that option proves to be wrong. So that's the second framework which we have to keep in mind while answering situational questions. So if you are liking this video till now, make sure you give me a thumbs up. And now that we have understood what is an ideal project manager behavior framework, let's go ahead and try to understand what type of situational questions you might expect in the PMP exam. Now, if you see types of situational questions in the PMP exam, you will find two types of situational questions, okay? And that is differentiated in terms of the question stem. So type 1 question stems talks about what is the best course of action or what should the project manager do. So these type of questions ideally tries to focus on the project manager behavior framework, which we just learned, okay? And there is a type 2 set of questions which has the question stems like what is the next step, or what should the project manager do next, or what is the next best course of action. And essentially these type of questions are trying to test your prioritization and the sequencing capability. So to summarize, type 1 questions focuses on the project manager behavior, and type 2 questions focuses on the prioritization and the sequencing capability of a project manager. Now with that, we move on to the step-by-step method of solving the situational questions. Okay. So step 1, do not forget the positive bias principle while answering any situational question. So it links to the framework of positive bias what we talked, and that will be our step 1, that whenever we approach a situational question, we will always remember the positive bias principle. Step 2 is we categorize the question as a type 1 question or a type 2 question depending on the question stem. And this step is very important because step 3 and 4 will be different for a type 1 question and for a type 2 question. So next we move on to the step 3 and 4 for a type 1 question. Okay, so just to refresh your memory, type 1 question asks about what is the best course of action or what should the project manager do, and it essentially focuses on the project manager behavior framework. So step 3 for these type of questions is go back to the ideal project manager framework, analyze and start eliminating options. And step 4 is we iterate this with the positive bias principle to arrive at the right answer. So that completes all the steps required to answer a type 1 situational question. Now when we will move on to the examples, you will see that exactly how we use this framework to solve the questions. Moving on, for type 2 questions which has the stems like what is the next step or what should the project manager do next or what is the next logical step, it essentially focuses on the sequencing or the prioritization capabilities of a project manager. So step 3 talks about that only, that for these type of questions we need to identify the knowledge area of the process group and recall any sequence if necessary. Now mostly in my videos I have already talked of two sequences. The first sequence is the page 61 of the table 4.1 of PMBOK edition 6, which talks about memorizing the 49 processes of the PMBOK. And the second sequence, which is very important, is the perform integrated change control sequence. So if you have not watched those two videos, I'll link them in my description. Go ahead and watch these two videos, guys, because these are very essential for the step 3 of this framework, because if you are not able to recall the sequences properly, you will invariably get the questions wrong, let me tell you. Okay, so with step 3 we move on to step 4, that we reiterate with the positive bias principle to arrive at the right answer. So that completes the 4 steps for the type 2 questions. Now I hope you are taking notes, guys. Okay, and if you are liking the video till now, just make sure you hit the like button as well. Now what I'll do is, we have understood the full framework of solving a situational question of type 1 and a type 2. I hope you took notes, or even if you have not taken notes, feel free to go back to those parts of the video whenever we go ahead and solve the questions now. That completes the framework of solving situational questions in the PMP exam. Okay. So now what we'll do is, we'll take up a couple of questions between medium to high level of difficulty from the PMP exam. So these questions represent the type of questions you will expect in the actual PMP exam, and we'll use this exact framework to help you understand how you can use this framework to solve these questions. Okay, so let's get started with question number 1. So this is the first question, guys. Pause the video and try to answer this question. Okay, so we will start to answer this question using the framework which we have defined. So step 1 is, do not forget the positive bias principle, which states that we analyze every option word by word with a positive bias until we get a solid reason to reject it. Okay. Now with that in mind, we will move on to step 2, which is categorizing the question as per the same as a type 1 or a type 2 question. So let's read the question. It is stating that you are a project manager for an IT company and you have recently completed an application development for a client, but the client is still calling you and your team members to solve technical issues, and troubleshooting requests are coming as well as some change requests are also coming. And what should you do to ensure that this application project is now having ongoing operational support? So if you see the stem of this project from here to here, it is a type 1 question which talks about mostly what should you do as a project manager type. Okay. Now we have completed step 2. We have categorized the question as a type 1 question. Now we will move on to step 3, which talks about start eliminating options using the ideal project manager framework. Now when we read every option, we will read it with a positive bias and try to accept it rather than reject it, or we get a strong ground where we reject the option. Okay. So first is option A, obtain project acceptance from customer. Maybe this option can be eliminated, because if you are a good project manager, you know that the customer will never give a project acceptance in this situation, because there are still some small changes etc which are getting suggested. Okay, so whatever you may do, you will not get a project acceptance from the customer. So this option we can eliminate. Next is close the project, decommission the team and find a new project. Okay. Now, if you go back to the framework of ideal project manager, there is one principle which states that never bypass processes and documentation to accelerate delivery, right? But option B is going against it. It is stating that the project manager should close the project and decommission the team where the customer is yet not satisfied and there are some issues which are still going on. So option B is also not correct. We can safely eliminate it. Option C, keep supporting the customer as the application is still under development. Okay, this may be a possible option. We will hold this option. And option D is perform a project handover, which says that you hand over the project from the project department to the operations department. Okay, so we will hold this as well. So it is clear that the correct answer lies between option C or option D. Now let's go back to our step 3, which states that iterate the ideal project manager framework to identify the best option. Now if we look at option C, guys, very carefully, it is telling that keep supporting the customer as the application is still under development. Now if you read the question very carefully here, see this. It is saying in the very beginning that the application development is completed. But here it is saying that it is still under development. So mostly it's a wrong option. Okay. Now, if you try to understand it from a project manager perspective, a project manager after the project closes always hands over the project to the customer or to the next department. And it also comes from the project manager behavior framework, where it states that a good project manager holds every department accountable for their tasks. Okay. So a good project manager after doing the project always hands it over to another entity, which may be the client, the customer or the operations department. Now it is not acceptable or not as per project management norms to keep on supporting the customer for eternity. That cannot happen, right? The project needs to be closed and the project manager needs to move on to other projects, right? So that is why option C is also wrong. And option D is the correct answer, which is perform a project handover. And by that, it means that you should perform a project handover to the operational department. Now you see here the strategy what we took here is we analyzed every option with a positive bias until and unless we found a very strong reason to reject it. So that's the learning, guys. Never reject an option until and unless you get a strong reason for it. That was not so difficult, right? You just need some practice, guys, and you will master this framework and you will master the art of solving situational questions. Let's move on to question number 2 now. So we move on to question number 2. Pause the video and try to answer this question. Okay, so we will start answering this question. Step number 1, we will always keep the bedrock principle in mind that whenever we read an option, we will try to accept it as long as we find a very strong reason to reject that option. Moving on to step number 2, we will first understand the type of the question. So it is asking what is the next logical step in the question stem. So that hints that it will be a type 2 question. Moving on, step number 3, we need to identify which of the process groups or the knowledge area this question falls. Okay, so for that, let's read the question quickly. A construction project is nearing completion, and as a PM, you have inspected the deliverables, very important, for completeness and correctness. So you are in the validate scope process group. Okay, so if you see table number 4.1, you are right in this stage of the monitoring and controlling process group, which is validate scope. So you are in the validate scope process. So step number 4, we try to recall whether any of the sequences of the change management process or the 49 process groups will help. But mostly in this particular step, there is not much of a sequence to recall. So we will move where we will start analyzing the options and try to eliminate them on solid grounds. Option A, start project closure process. Okay. So maybe this can be an option. Let's park this option for a while, because after validate scope and control scope, you go ahead and start the project closure. So this may be a correct option. Let's move ahead. Hand over the project to the customer. Okay, this can also be a correct option. Let's hold it for a while. Option C, have your customer inspect the deliverables for correctness. This can also be a correct option. Let's park it right now. Option D, perform cost reconciliation. Maybe we can eliminate this option fully because it falls under the cost management scope, and here it is mostly about the inspected deliverables and the completion of scope. So it nowhere relates to cost reconciliation, so we can safely eliminate option D. Now we are left with option A, B and C. Let's go back in the iteration process and analyze those options again. Now starting project closure. Now see what the question talks about here. So here it talks that as a PM you have inspected the deliverables, but does the question talk that whether the customer has accepted the deliverables? So you may have inspected the deliverables, but the customer may come and say that, hey, I don't agree with your inspection calibration. Maybe you don't find any defects, but I do find defects in deliverables, and you need to correct that. And as a project manager, you need to take the customer feedback into account. So that way, as a project manager, if you just inspect the deliverables, you can't go into the project closure process. Okay, so that way it skips the sequence. So that is a wrong option. So we will eliminate this option. Next, hand over the project to the customer. So for the same reason, you can't hand over the project to the customer just after your inspection. You need to ensure that the customer also inspects the project deliverables. Okay, so that way this option also gets eliminated on solid grounds. And with that, we have option C, which is having your customer inspect the deliverables for correctness, which completes the validate scope process. And then you can go ahead and move into the closing process group. So that is why option C is the right answer. So that's how you use this framework to solve situational questions. If you have liked the video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, guys. Okay, it keeps me motivated. And also subscribe to my channel because I upload amazing video like this regularly in this channel. Now I am considering of creating a playlist to help you understand how to solve these situational questions using the framework across all the knowledge areas of the PMP exam. So we will start with integration management, move on to scope management, schedule management and cost management. So do you think I should start this playlist? Will it help you? Just let me know in the comment section below so that I get to know whether these kind of a playlist will really help you guys. Okay, so let me know in the comment section below. But before you go, make sure you watch this video right here, which talks about how to create a brain dump of all the important mathematical equations in the PMP exam. You must master this skill of creating this brain dump so that you can solve any numerical problem in the PMP exam super fast and super easy. Thank you for watching today's video, and I'll see you again in this video. Bye bye.